I've been told I'm a good deal like my grandmother, and nothing could make me happier. I adored my grandmother. She was born in Providence, Rhode Island in 1899. She was a lady. She had deep faith, she was funny, and she was feisty. I never heard her say an unkind word about anyone, and she never complained. As a child, well, for all of my growing years, we would go from Poughkeepsie, New York, where I grew up, to Providence, Rhode Island for Thanksgiving with Granny and Grampy. It seemed like it was an interminable trip. It took forever to get there. And we knew we had arrived when we heard the sound of gravel under the tires. To this day, when I drive over gravel, I remember Granny and Grampy and being at their house for Thanksgiving. And it's a lovely, warm memory. Granny had an incredible knack for entertaining children. In her kitchen, she had a big sink. I don't know how big it really was, but as a child, I knew it was huge. And it was made of stone, and it was only about this deep. She would set 4 stools or chairs in front of this, and each of us had our own place to be at the sink, and she would put a little bit of warm water and a washing detergent, so it was all bubbly. And we had pots and pans and wooden spoons and rubber duckies and boats and whatever. We played in the warm, sudsy water by the hour. What an inspired idea. Children love water and sand. So being in Rhode Island for Thanksgiving was a lot of fun. It's a treasured memory. We also had the incredible blessing of sharing our summers with Granny and Grampy in a shared house on Martha's Vineyard. We had Granny all summer. Granny had a knack for entertaining us on the days when the weather wasn't so nice. She would give each one of us a deck of cards, and then she taught us how to shuffle. As a small child, you would bend up at the corners of the cards and go and intermix them all and then shove them together. Years passed, our hands got bigger. She's still teaching us to shuffle cards. Then we could hold the cards with our knuckles in the middle and a thumb on one end and pinkies on the other end and go like this, and the cards would all shuffle together, and then we could lift them up and they would flow down into a deck again. We got to be really, really good card shufflers. And Granny taught my sister and me how to knit. These are great ways to keep my sister and me away from each other, which was a very good idea. In 1980s, we were still going to Providence for Thanksgiving. By this time, I was married and had children of my own. My sister was married and had children. And my aunt and uncle were responsible for Thanksgiving because Granny was in her 80s, having been born in 1899. We always knew right how old she was. So my aunt and uncle were in charge of Thanksgiving. My aunt decided that the day after Thanksgiving, we would all go bowling. Nobody in the family bowled, so we thought this was a great idea. Even playing field, would all go bowling. We got to the bowling alley, and it was duck pins. Duck pins are a little narrow, tall, sort of a stick, and the ball's only about this big. Granny decides she's going to teach us how to do this. So here are 16 of us looking at her. She says, now this is how you do it. And she got the ball, and she turned around, and she went like this. And she threw it, and she had beautiful form, not a whole lot of strength. The ball rolled, and it rolled, and it rolled. Eventually, it got down to the pins. It hit the first pin, and it went over. And then another pin went over. It was like slow motion. They all went down. Granny had bowled a strike. We were astounded. She turned around, and she says, now that's how you do it. And then she looked at us a little more closely, and she said, I wish you could see your faces. We must have been slack-jawed. But at that point, we cheered and we applauded. Granny was teaching us how to bowl. I had no idea that as a young woman, she'd been quite a good bowler. She hadn't lost it, and there she was in her mid-80s. She could still bowl. In the 1990s, my aunt and uncle made a deal with her. She was still living in her own home. Grampy having died in 1975, she'd been by herself a good long time, lived in her own home, drove her own car. She was very pleased about this. As a matter of fact, she bought herself a new car when she was 90 years old because she needed a new car. She also bought a new refrigerator, and I thought, You go, girl. So my aunt and uncle made a deal with her. They said, if you want to live by yourself, you're going to have to wear one of those, we call them the help, I can't get up buttons, that you wear on a little chain or a ribbon or something around your neck. And so she did. She wore this all the time. One day she was unloading her groceries and she goes in the house with her stuff and the phone's ringing. And she goes over and she picks up the phone and she says, hello. And they said, Mrs. Smith, are you all right? She said, well, yes. Why do you ask? And they said, well, your alarm's going off. She glanced down, and as she told me later, I was clutching a bottle of bourbon to my chest, and I certainly couldn't tell him that. I don't know what she told him, probably it was groceries. In 1995, she nearly lost her leg. Her circulation had gotten really bad, and she had cellulitis. So they took a vein and turned it into an artery to restore blood flow to her leg. And the doctor took my mother and my aunt and uncle to the side and said quietly, she'll never walk again. They didn't know who they were dealing with. She did everything they asked her to in physical therapy and occupational therapy and more. She got to the point, not only could she walk again, she didn't even need a cane. But at this point, it was time for her to move into assisted living. She would need help with her recovery. And my aunt and uncle had retired to North Carolina, so they really needed somebody to watch out for her. So she moved into a wonderful place called Tockwatton. They had railings along the walls. I guess all assisted living places do. What an inspired idea. And I would visit her, and she'd be holding onto the railing and swinging her leg. And then she'd walk down a little further, and she'd swing her other leg. She was still exercising. She was still proactive in her health and well-being. I really admired that. She lived in Tockwatton for 5 years. And then she got more and more frail, and they moved her into the nursing home, which was on one end of the building. She lived in the nursing home for 2 years, which is a very long time. I've been told the average stay in a nursing home is about 6 months. She was there for 2 years. And I remember thinking, I don't think she can find the door. She doesn't know how to leave. I was going down to Martha's Vineyard with a girlfriend named Onda, and we stopped in Providence to see Granny in Tockwatton. We walked into her room, and I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that she was dying. It was very clear. She was fretful, she was complaining, she was unhappy, this was not her character. I went out to the nurse at the desk and told her what I was seeing, and she said she's refused to eat or drink anything for 2 days. Her bladder's irritated and she's uncomfortable. There's really nothing we can do about this. So I went back and I sat on the edge of the bed and I held her hand and I stroked her hands and I talked to her. Her hearing aids were out and she was profoundly deaf at this point in her life. But sometimes at the very end of life, faculties are restored and people can hear and say and see things that have been unavailable to them for a very long time. So I spoke to her as if she could hear me. And I said, look for Charlie. Grampy, her beloved Charlie. I said, look for Charlie. He's waiting for you. Find Charlie. Go to Charlie. And she reached up and stroked my face. So I knew she knew who I was. She didn't reach for my friend Onda. When we left, it was sad. I knew I would never see her again. We went on to Martha's Vineyard for a visit. And I was walking across the lawn about 2 days after being in Providence. And 2 red-tailed hawks flew up over the embankment and right over my head. And I got the chills, and I thought, oh, she's found him. My uncle called that afternoon and said that Granny had passed away at 1 o'clock. And I said, no. It was 10:30 in the morning. I didn't say it to him, but I knew it was 10:30 in the morning when I had seen those hawks. She came to tell me I found him. I know I have a ways to go, but my fondest wish is to be more and more like Granny. Thank you.